So as Pauline mentioned, my name is Aoife O'Brien and my business is empowerment coaching. I work with individuals, I work with organizations. I speak an awful lot about things like motivation and imposter syndrome as well. I've become quite known for that. I work with individuals and organizations. I'm really passionate about anything to do with fitting in at work or finding the right kind of path or finding the right thing for you to do. I'm currently completing a master's in organizational behavior, so I'm in the absolute thick of it at the moment with my dissertation. I'm doing research into fit and how that impacts on positive work outcomes like engagement, satisfaction, and a lower intent to quit. I also have a podcast called Happier at Work, and while it's primarily aimed at people working in a kind of corporate environment, working in HR, that kind of thing, actually the feedback I've been getting from a lot of entrepreneurs is that they can really relate to the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So if you haven't checked it out, I would definitely say check it out. I'm here today talking about how to stay motivated. The kind of tips and tools that I'm going to be talking about are very much related to psychology based on what I'm learning in my master's. And I would love for this session to be absolutely as interactive as possible. Pauline is going to man the chat. So if you have any questions, pop them into the chat. It would be great if you could all put yourselves on mute as well so that there's no kind of disturbance or anything going on. But yeah, I'll get started anyway on what I'm going to talk about. So what I'm going to talk about is our three basic universal needs. So I'm going to talk about what those are, and then I thought maybe we could have the first break and we can talk about, I like to be as practical as possible. So we can talk about, well, what's one thing that we can do differently based on what we've learned about those three needs. And then I can going to talk about some other needs that we have, and then I'm going to talk about some other considerations as well that you need to bear in mind. So first of all, I wanted to kind of introduce this by talking about the concept of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is external to us. It's something that we're motivated by from the outside. So it could be you feel compelled to kind of conform, or it could be you're rewarded by something, or you're paid to do something. So they're all kind of extrinsic reasons for being motivated. So you're motivated for a reason external to yourself. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, and that's what I'm going to be primarily focusing on, is internally driven. So it's a reason that you have to do something, but it's completely driven by your internal systems and your internal desires to want to do something. And intrinsic motivation is much, much better and much stronger than extrinsic motivation. So finding reasons internally to want to do something or to feel motivated to do something is going to drive us a lot more strongly to actually do that. So the three needs that I want to cover today, they are universal needs. That means that every single person has them. They may have them to different degrees. So some people might have stronger needs within specific areas of those, but we all have these three universal needs. And as I said, I'm going to talk about other needs later on, so you might be able to relate to those other needs, but you should be able to relate to all three of these needs as I talk about them. An easy way to remember them, so the three needs are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And the easy way to remember them is CAR, car. So I've got a little picture of a car there at the side. So I'll talk a little bit more about what each of those means in a second. But I just wanted to remember what those are. So competence, autonomy, relatedness. We all have these three needs. They're innate in us. And yeah, so I'll talk about, oh, I don't need to have that. Let me just check a second. No, sorry. I thought I had an additional slide. Sorry about that. So I'll talk about each of these needs. So competence is really that feeling that you're capable of doing what it is that you're doing. But that capability is reinforced as well, so that you feel an innate ability to be able to do something. Autonomy then is that sense of choice and control over what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it. Relatedness then is how you relate to other people who are doing what you're doing, or whether that might be people that you're working with, or it could be your clients. But also, in addition to that, it's about relating what it is that you're doing to a bigger picture. So whether that's your kind of longer term goals, or whether it's your plan for your life, all of those kind of things, like how is everything interconnected? How is it actually related? So I'm going to talk about each one of these needs individually. And the thing to bear in mind with these needs is that you can have too much or too little of any of them at any one time. So as I'm talking through, I'd love for you to really think about where you feel frustrated by something that's going on at the moment, and how you might be able to use one of these needs to satisfy that need in a different way. So first of all, I want to talk about this whole idea of competence. So I'm sure you can relate to this, that when you first know about something, or when you first get into something, you go through a huge spike in confidence about being able to, you're like, I know everything about this, and and you see yourself as an expert. And then you realize, actually, there's so much more to know about this that I didn't realize. And then your confidence sort of wanes as your experience goes up. And this tends to happen quite a lot. And within that kind of trough there, that's where imposter syndrome really, really creeps in, where you thought you knew everything, and then you as you become more experienced, you realize that you knew less than what you thought you knew, and there's so much more to know. So you start feeling a little bit less confident about what it is that you're working on. But as time progresses and you learn more, then your confidence increases again, until it plateaus. Then you get to a stage where you're kind of fully competent and you feel really comfortable. This is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So you might be familiar, like even in some instances, I won't mention any names of any presidents that may or may not exist, but when you have this huge amount of confidence, but actually your experience isn't that much, and your competence isn't really that high, and yet you still feel this sense of competence. So that's the opposite of imposter syndrome. And what that kind of translates to, so you kind of start with having, or I suppose that at one end of the scale, you've got not having enough competence. So it's when you don't feel capable of doing something. So you don't feel that you have the capability, and you can oftentimes get in your own way. And this relates very, very strongly with imposter syndrome. So you feel maybe that you're not good enough. You could be comparing yourself to other people. You have this fear that you're somehow going to be found out that you're not competent. And you feel a little bit out of your depth. So I'm sure a lot of you going in, starting your own business, this has crept up at some stage. And I'd love to hear in the chat, if you just want to type in, if you're willing to admit it, and there's no shame in it whatsoever, if you've ever experienced this, or give the thumbs up or something, just to kind of let me know what you're thinking around that. So that's on the one end of the scale. It's not enough competence. On the other side, then, you could have too much competence. So that's when you get a little bit bored and you get a little bit complacent, and you feel that maybe you can do this in the back. You could kind of do this with your eyes closed. But what the trick is to find the kind of the medium ground between those, where you feel capable of doing it, but that you're not so bored, that there's a certain degree of challenge to what you're doing as well, that you're not feeling bored and you're not feeling frustrated. Because oftentimes when you're too competent, that's when that creeps in. In terms of how this relates to motivation, then, if you feel that you have not enough competence, then you're not motivated to try something. You're not motivated to get involved, to really try. And oftentimes you almost kind of self-sabotage, or you stop yourself from doing it. On the other hand, then, if you have too much competence, if you're feeling a little bit bored, a little bit complacent, equally there's not enough challenge there, and you don't feel motivated to do it. Ways that you can feel more competence, and have a think of some of these things of what you're doing now versus what you're not doing now, because when we go into the breakout rooms, it'd be really great to talk about what are the things, or at least what's one thing. I was chatting to Pauline before we came on. What's one thing, as a result of hearing what I have to say today, what's one thing that you're going to do differently? Because I don't want you to walk away and be like, I have all of this new knowledge and I'm going to do this, these 5 things, and then not do any of it. But what I would really love is if you commit to making one small change as a result of what I say today, and actually for that change to stick, and for you to do it consistently and to keep going with it. So firstly, when it comes to competence, ways to feel a greater sense of competence is to complete something that you've been putting off for ages. And I know for me, as soon as this pandemic hit, as soon as we were in lockdown, I just sort of thought to myself, right, okay, now I have all of this time that I've said I don't have any time to do this, this, and this, and there's stuff that I've been putting off for ages. I put together a guide for imposter syndrome. That's something that I had in my mind to do for a long time, and I just kept putting it off because I didn't feel like I had the time. So that's something that I got off my to-do list, if you like, and I just felt such a sense of accomplishment from doing that. Celebrate the wins, excuse me, no matter how small. Now, this is something that I really struggle with. I'm the kind of person who tends to go from project to project. I'll go from thing to, what's next on the to-do list, without actually reflecting on, well, what have I actually achieved? So what I've started doing is on Fridays looking at, well, what have I actually done this week? What have I achieved? What did I set out to do? And did I achieve that? And if I did, then it's kind of a pat on the back, a recognition for myself. We'll talk more about other needs later on in terms of how you might celebrate that, or how you might recognize yourself for doing that. Because for different people, it'll be different things. They will use different things to celebrate and to kind of reward themselves. Gather client feedback from past clients, or ask current clients to provide feedback to you. So both of these, although it's external, it's something that helps you to feel a little bit more competent in what you're doing, especially if you have a wobbly day, or if you have a day when you just really don't feel like getting up out of bed, or you feel like you don't have what it takes. It's something that you can hold on to and refer back to afterwards as well, that you can be like, okay, so, whether it's the imposter syndrome is talking in your head and saying, Aoife, you have no idea what you're talking about. You can't do this, or you can't deal with XYZ person because they're way too senior, or whatever it might be. You pull out your lovely little, however you want to document it, and you read through some of the past feedback that clients have given you, saying how wonderful you are. And that reignites then this sense of accomplishment, this sense of competence in you, and hopefully banishes the imposter out of your head, temporarily at least. So next I want to talk about autonomy. And autonomy is a funny one, because oftentimes as entrepreneurs, one of the huge reasons that we decide to set up our own businesses in the first place is to have freedom and flexibility. So who can relate to that? Pop into the chat, or give me the thumbs up if you can relate to, the reason I set up my business was to have more freedom and flexibility and be able to manage my own time. So that's brilliant. Autonomy, you would think then, is oftentimes not a huge issue for entrepreneurs, because we have all of the autonomy that we want. However, what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, so on the one hand, you have not enough autonomy. And hands up who has ever been micromanaged, because I know I have in the past, and maybe I have been a micromanager in the past, because autonomy is about choice and control. You want something done in a certain way, And as a manager, if you want to tell, you kind of tell people what you want them to do, how you want them to do it. But being on the receiving end of that is it's not very productive. It's not very motivating at all. Now, I was talking to a client of mine the other day, and she also pointed out that sometimes you feel this sense of a kind of a lack of choice or a lack of control when you're working with clients that you really don't want to work with. And I'm sure we can all relate to that. We've all been there where, clients are being very demanding, or you took it on because you needed the money, but actually now you're like, this is more of a headache than anything else. And you don't feel that sense of choice, and you don't feel that sense of control over what it is that you're doing. So for entrepreneurs, that's one way that not enough autonomy can show up. On the other hand, then we have too much autonomy, and this is by far the kind of one of the biggest problems that entrepreneurs have. We have too much autonomy. We have too much freedom, too much choice, too much control over what it is that we're trying to do. And again, I'd love to know in the chat or give me the thumbs up who can really relate to this. You have too much autonomy, and too much autonomy results in a lack of direction. So you don't know which way you're going because you have so much choice about all of these different things that you could do. And I know that's something that I find quite challenging, is just picking one thing, because there's so many different things that I could do, that I want to do, but focusing on just one thing is quite difficult. So if you want to pop into the chat, is this something that you can relate to, having too much autonomy? Pauline, do you want to kind of share anything, any insights people are sharing from the chat?
Just a lot of people saying totally, and yeah. I like Gillian said, autonomy and agency is very important. And, yeah, and it was the same with competence. There's a lot of agreement. Some people saying even after 20 years they still have that feeling of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes having too much autonomy, like you don't. I love that word that Gillian used, agency. It's such a kind of psychological word. It's such a kind of associated with psychology, but agency is like this sense of control over what it is that you're doing. That you have the freedom to be able to do it, and you need to take responsibility for it. And sometimes that responsibility, in itself can be quite daunting as well. So here's some suggested ways about how to feel more in control. So get clear about your business vision, and now is the opportunity to review your business plan. If you haven't done it already, we're into week 8 or going into week 9 in lockdown. Now is the opportunity to have a look at what is it that you're doing. A lot of people have already pivoted their businesses, or they're looking at pivoting, or they're looking to get support. I think it was mentioned about she just got the continuity voucher. So, looking at different ways, getting mentoring. What is it that ultimately you're trying to do, and how are you going to get there? So really taking the opportunity to look at that and what it is that you're doing. Create a plan then. Now, planning works for different people in different ways. People kind of chunk times in different ways. I know for me, I like looking at things in quite a small level of detail. And I was hugely surprised when I spoke to a coach I think it was about a year and a half ago. And I had in my head that, well, short term is a year, long term or medium term is maybe 5 years, and long term is 10 years, or maybe was 1, 2, and 5, something like that. Anyway, we went through a process of doing my short, medium, and long-term goals. And I was so surprised to be like, right, okay, short-term is much shorter than I thought, but that's just how I operate. So I was trying to place how other people work onto what it is that I do. And that really wasn't working for me. And it was very overwhelming and very scary. Like trying to think about 5 years into the future. Like for me, that doesn't work at all. For me, the timeframes need to be much, much shorter. So when I'm planning, and I was just thinking this morning how much better it would be for me to be like, right, in the morning I need to do this, in the afternoon I need to do this. So even breaking it down further than just like, today I need to do this. I need to have the really small detail. This morning this happens, this afternoon that happens. But looking at your plan for your day, for your week, for your month, however you like to plan that, think about, you know, like there's loads of different options. For me, I get a little bit overwhelmed with all of the different options, and I like to try out new things for like to see how I can be more efficient in planning my day. So if you need any tips on that, then absolutely reach out to me. But it's really about finding what actually works for you. And then it's sticking to that plan that you have made. So committing that plan to paper, and then going through and even taking time to reflect and review at the end of a day or at the end of a week or at the end of a month, what went well, what didn't go so well, and what can you do differently the next time, rather than being kind of a spinning out of control of, well, not really learning from what's not working well. So give us the thumbs up there if that all makes sense to you. And the last kind of the universal needs that I want to talk about before we go into our breakout room is this idea of relatedness. So on the one hand, there's not enough relatedness. And on the other hand, there's too much relatedness. And I'd love to get some feedback on the too much relatedness, because it's really hard to think about what does too much relatedness actually mean. They're kind of interrelated. The not enough and the too much, they're a little bit interrelated. So I'd love to kind of get your feedback and your thoughts on that. So not enough relatedness is that sense of you feel like you don't really belong where you are. And I know I certainly have had that experience, certainly in the workplace, but also like when you meet people and you feel like you don't really gel, they're not really your kind of people. Or if you're dealing with clients and you have this niggling feeling that actually this is not the right person. The other element to that then is that you don't know how you're contributing to the business. So whether that's what you do on a day-to-day basis, or whether it's you don't really know what you're doing on a day-to-day basis or week to week or month to month, how is that contributing to that long-term vision? So that vision that you've created from your sense of autonomy, how is what you're doing on a day-to-day basis actually contributing to that? And to take that a little step further, how is that contributing to the kind of life that you want to have? So I suppose this time in particular, people, I feel, have had an awful lot of time to really reflect on what's going on for them and what they're doing in business and what they really, really want from their life, because it's a global pandemic, it's a traumatic event. People have more time. Whether they are taking that time to reflect or not is a different story. But it is, you should have the opportunity at least to think about these things. And when you think about these things, how is it what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's those people that you're interacting with, whether it's what you're doing in your business and how that contributes to your life. So it's an opportunity to think about all of those things and how they, how they are interconnected, or how do they relate to your life. Now, this is where I'd love to get your feedback on. So too much relatedness can result in having clicks, but equally not enough relatedness as well. So you being on the, I suppose, the receiving end of that. So clicks are, they kind of form. I certainly have had that experience in work, not so much since I've set up my own business. But clicks and exclusion will be resulting from having too much relatedness. So there's not enough kind of diversity within what it is that's going on. Does that make sense to people, or does anyone else have any thoughts? Pop them into the chat. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah.
Nothing? Okay, so
yeah.
If that's okay, how are we doing for time? Okay, so if we do a 5-minute breakout session, and then I'll continue after that 5-minute session. But in that, what I would love to know is what's one thing out of what I've spoken about, autonomy, relatedness, and competence, what is one thing that you're going to do differently? And sorry, just before we go on to that, I just want to share how to feel more relatedness. So reflect on what you want from your life and how your business relates to what you want from your life. Connect with other entrepreneurs through virtual coffee mornings like this one. So thank you for being here. Ask yourself, how is what I'm doing now related to my business plan? Assuming that you have a business plan. So Pauline, do you want to, like you were saying, maybe break into two or three breakout sessions and do a bit of networking. Share about what's just one thing that you're going to do differently based on what I said about competence, autonomy, relatedness.
Recording.
Great. So I wanted to talk as well about the other needs that we have. Now, these are not universal needs. So some you might have and some you might not have. And again, I'd love if you want to pop into the chat and share any experiences that you have. Some of these needs I have, some of them I can relate to a little bit more than others. And it's by no means an exhaustive list. I've actually reduced the list that I share with people because it can be a little bit overwhelming to see all of them. So it's by no means an exhaustive list of needs. But one other need that some people have and others don't is this need for reward. So rewarding yourself for a job well done. And I know when I spoke to that coach, a number of, when was that, about 18 months ago or so, and she was like, and what reward are you going to give yourself when you get to when you reach your short-term goal or your task or whatever? And for me, I'm not driven by rewards, so I don't reward myself. But if anyone wants to pop in their chat, like what kind of rewards do they give themselves? Like I kind of made stuff up and said, well, I like to travel, so maybe I'll have a weekend away or a night away or something like that. But if anyone wants to pop in the chat, like, is this something that you relate to, and is it something that you need in order to be motivated? So you do something and then you reward yourself because you've done that thing. Is that something that motivates you? It's not something that motivates me. Recognition, however, is something that motivates me. So being recognized for a job well done, being recognized publicly. So even like things like getting feedback or getting press coverage, those kinds of things are really, really motivating for me. So they'll drive me to keep going and doing what I'm doing. I mentioned earlier that I have a podcast. When I get feedback on the podcast saying keep up the good work, just something like keep up the good work, that in itself is enough to keep me going. It makes me feel motivated. It makes it feel like it's all worthwhile, that it's worth continuing doing what I'm doing. Growth and learning, then again, this is something that I can really relate to. I like to grow and develop as a person. And if you consider, or if you think about things as any situation is an opportunity for growth and learning. So even if you fail, I don't like to use that word fail, but you can take it as an opportunity to learn from that and take time to reflect and like, how have I grown as a person? How have I changed in the last year, in the last 2 months, even since this global pandemic has happened, in the last 10 years? You get all your Facebook memories popping up and you think back like, wow, I was actually a different person. I've grown quite a lot. Higher purpose then. So how can you relate to what you're doing to how you're contributing to some sort of higher purpose? Is this something that you can be motivated by? And how to relate what it is that you're doing to this kind of bigger picture, higher purpose, whatever you want to call that, whatever that kind of means to you. Stability then. So, I mean, oftentimes people who employ themselves they're not necessarily out for stability, but some people have a small need for stability by getting, like, whether it's a regular income, regular clients, that kind of thing. If that's something that you need, maybe it's something that you need to reassess and have a look at, like, well, what is it that what can I do to make myself feel a better sense of stability and therefore motivated to kind of continue on? Variety then is another one. So again, this is not something that I can necessarily relate to. If you put me in a room with a whole load of data and, trawling through research and things like that, that's my background. I'd be happy to do that and spend the entire day doing that. I don't need to have that sense of variety on a day-to-day basis, but some people do. And if that's something that you do need to keep motivated, then have a think about what can you do to have a bit of variety in your day. So whether it's connecting with people, reaching out to clients, checking emails, being a bit more creative in the afternoon, things like that. How do you inject a bit of variety into your day to be motivated? And instead of working on one thing for an entire day, maybe spend an hour or two in the morning working on it across the entire week and having your days as having variety within your days. Achievement then, and again, this is something that I can hugely relate to, and I think you know, other people can definitely relate to this as well. It's when you have stuff written out, and we were kind of talking earlier about this mammoth task of the dissertation is done, yeah, tick, but that's made up of these hundreds of smaller tasks that I can do. And if I can tick the box on those, I get a great sense of achievement, and it motivates me and it pushes me on to want to do more. So pop into the chat and tell me if you have any thoughts around what it is that I am sharing there. I want to, before kind of closing off, I want to talk about some other considerations as well. So I wanted to talk about the comfort zone, and I saw this presentation. I was down in Mayo in September, and I saw this really great presentation, and I just love talking about this whole idea. So we often talk about stepping out of the comfort zone, and that tends to be something quite scary. So stepping out of the comfort zone, to me, it sounds a bit like you're taking a huge kind of leap, whereas if you're stretching the comfort zone, you're within your comfort zone and you're stretching it slightly. So you're doing something that you don't really want to do, or you don't really like to do, or you feel a little bit out of your depth, or you feel a little bit afraid to do it. You do it, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, and you get used to it, and that becomes your comfort zone. And then you stretch it again by doing something a little bit more scary, a little bit more uncomfortable. And it's about this whole idea of not everything that you do is supposed to feel comfortable. In order to stretch and grow, you need to be a little bit out of your comfort zone. So if you're not feeling motivated to get out of your comfort zone, then that's, I suppose, something that you just need to get over and start being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I wanted to talk about another couple of things. So one of the things that really resonated with me is the idea of self-compassion versus discipline, and I suppose the kind of two extremes around that. So I can be very, very disciplined and sometimes lacking in self-compassion, but then I might go the other extreme and be really, really self-compassionate and let myself away with everything. And I suppose it's finding that balance between the two. And sometimes the best self-compassion that you can show yourself is to remain disciplined. So don't be too hard on yourself, but also don't be too easy on yourself. Find that balance between the two. So if you're finding it a struggle to get stuff done, like don't just let yourself away with it, but equally be nice to yourself. Can people relate to that? Because I know I shared this at a presentation a week or two ago, this concept of self-compassion versus discipline, and it really, really resonated with a lot of people. It's one of the key messages that they took away. And I know for me, it's something that I am trying to be more self-compassionate. So if you want to pop in the chat, and Pauline, if you want to flag anything that's in the chat there as well.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of agreement about, different ways of rewarding. I think Pam said feedback keeps her going, and Gillian is saying, personal growth and so on works better than rewards as such, and Yolanda is talking about customer comments really motivate her. So yeah, there's a few people agreeing with you on the last point as well about self-compassion, discipline.
Yeah. And then the last point then is progress versus perfection. So I know for myself, I can be really perfectionistic. I can give me a sheet of paper and I can pick out the spelling errors, the grammar errors, all that kind of stuff. I'm very, very conscious of detail. I'm very detail oriented, and I can be really perfectionistic as well. But I want to illustrate I suppose the point of making progress, and done is better than perfect, but also in a way of being nice to yourself. Like, one question to ask at the end of the day is, did I try my best? Did I actually try my best? And it goes back, I suppose, to that the other point of discipline versus self-compassion. So if you didn't try your best, what can you do differently the next day? And it's not about judgment, it's about reflecting and understanding yourself and understanding what works best for you and what it is that you actually are trying to achieve, and how that relates. So based on, I don't know, we're kind of, we're not great on time. I thought maybe we could have another kind of chat at the end if people want to share based on what I was talking about the additional needs, someone who